Hello everybody, I'm Brian Hogue. Welcome to Chiller Chat. Tonight my guest is Kerry Haggard, and we're going to be talking about Kerry's book, Traveler. So Kerry, thanks for being on the show tonight.
My pleasure.
Now, your book, Traveler, could you explain to our viewers what your book's about?
Traveler is about the 1897 Aurora, Texas alien crash. April 17th, 1897, 6 o'clock in the morning, a single alien craft clipped the edge of a fast-moving windmill and slammed into the water tower of Aurora, Texas. It exploded and rained down debris all over the local judge's flower garden. It killed the alien inside, and the good-hearted folks of the time knew nothing better to do than to bury him in their local cemetery, where he remains to this day.
Oh, the body is still allegedly buried in that cemetery.
The body is still allegedly in the cemetery. In 1973, UPI released a story. The details had all been forgotten by then. But this reporter picked it up and released a story of a prehistoric astronaut buried in a small Texas cemetery that crashed there before the turn of the century. Well, of course, UFO hunters went out there with picks and shovels, and they were determined to dig him up. The city council had to post armed guards in the cemetery to keep them from doing that. So it was quite an event of the time, and since then the story has become a legend of one of the only documented cases of a buried extraterrestrial.
Okay. Now, was there something other than the body and the casket? Were there pieces of metal or anything like that were buried with the casket, or?
Yeah, it was reported that there were some fragments of the craft that were buried with the alien, and mysteriously they had been removed by a tube-like device going down and retrieving them out of the ground. Also in 1973, when the story broke and all the hoopla was going on, someone stole the original pre-century marker. The original marker that they put on his grave in 1897 was stolen and has never been recovered to this day.
Now, on that marker, wasn't there a sketching or a drawing of an object that may have been a UFO or something like that?
It was a depiction of his craft.
Okay.
With 3 little windows in it.
Right. Okay. I know a little bit about this because I've seen the stories on like the ancient aliens and so forth. It's a pretty popular story that took place back then. We know about Roswell, we know about Kecksburg, but this is something that took place back before we had aircraft.
Right, 50 years before Roswell, and it's one of the earliest really good documented cases out there.
Now, your book is. Tell us what your book is. It's not only just the. Yours is a story that is about this, correct?
My novel pays homage to the crash and the event. It is a fictional novel, but it has a lot of historical fact woven in with that. I tried to put into words how the good people of Aurora, Texas, would deal with such an event, what they would do. What they would do with the craft, what they would do with his body. Back then, it was even reported that they put him in a homemade coffin and put him on the boardwalk and took photographs like they would the outlaws of the time, popular people, because droves of people would come into town and see these dead outlaws on the boardwalk before they buried them. It was rumored that they did the same thing with him, although then no photographs have ever been found.
Wouldn't that be something if
that
they were?
That would be something.
Because they reported back then that the pilot was not of this world. I mean, they used some type of wording to allude to that, right?
There was a pretty well-documented account in the Dallas and the Fort Worth newspapers on April the 19th, 2 days later, talking about the crash and that the pilot would be buried in the cemetery the following day, which would have been, I guess, April 18th.
Okay.
So yes, it is such a fascinating story, and it was one of those sleeper stories that you just didn't hear that much about, and I guess that's what provoked me so to get involved and write the novel.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions is, what got you interested in this particular story?
Well, I've always been a fan, like you, of the Universal Horror Classics, Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Right.
All that stuff is just my favorite pieces in the world, to watch on television. But when I was little, 1973, I saw where a UFO had landed in our small hometown. My father was a avid follower of the police department. He actually was radio dispatcher for the police department for 19 years.
And what was your hometown?
Commerce, Georgia.
Okay.
And over his police band radio, there had been chatter for months of this was during the great UFO wave of 1973, when there were sightings all over the country.
Yep.
There had been reports for weeks, months, of low-flying craft in the area. There had been a reported landing where people had witnessed it in Danielsville, Georgia, the same year, like 1 month before, and Danielsville, Georgia is 12 miles from where we live. So anyway, wild reports came in to the police department of a flaming object that landed in the parking lot of the medical center clinic. Now, this was the same medical center clinic that my mother worked at the time.
Oh.
So, I'm jumping up and down, begging to go check it out.
Yeah.
My mom and I jump in her 1967 Oldsmobile green panel station wagon. We go flying over to the hospital. Well, there's no UFO in the object. There's a fire truck, 2 police cars, and 3 or 4 other people like us that had heard about it and went over to check it out.
Yeah.
But there was something amazing in the corner of the parking lot. There was a large 30-foot smoking circle, so hot it had melted down into the asphalt.
And you saw that?
And I saw that.
Wow.
I saw that with my
Wow.
own 2 eyes. I didn't see the object that made it,
Yeah.
but it was clear something that produced immense heat had set down, and in the short time it took those calls to come into the police department and a few people and the fire truck to respond, had taken off again and literally almost set the parking lot on fire. But what topped it off was 2 nights later, in the middle of the night, an asphalt crew came in there and completely repaved the parking lot.
Covered it up.
Covered it up.
Literally.
My mom came home that Monday, and she was all upset. And she says, "You'll never guess what they did." And I said, "What?" She said, "I'm a little kid." She said, "They repaved the whole parking lot. Not just the spot where the circle was, but the entire thing."
Wow.
So from that moment on, I was an avid believer and have been ever since.
I wonder what anybody who was standing there and actually witnessed the event saw. You said that they saw it actually land.
There were reports that came in to the police that they saw a flaming object landing in the vicinity of the medical center clinic, and that's where all that started.
Did they see it actually lift up and take off?
That I don't know.
Okay. Wow, that's quite a story. Well, I can see how that would get you intrigued in the UFO phenomenon. And back in 1973, like you said, there was such a rash of sightings across the United States, and kind of went hand in hand with the Bigfoot sightings at that time too. And so I can see where that would be pretty compelling to, not only to a child, but to an adult. What's going on. Now, then you became interested in this, and then when did you become interested in this particular story as far as writing your book?
Well, I'd never heard of the Aurora story, and in 2015, I met my co-author.
Okay.
And he was from Texas. And one day he was telling me, he knew I was interested in this kind of thing. One day he was telling me about this story of this little alien that crashed in North Texas and was buried there to this day. And I said, I've never heard that. And so I started researching it. Well, he was a pretty rough and rowdy guy back in his day. He was actually the leader of a bike organization.
Okay.
His name's Johnny Cochran. He's my best friend in the whole world. And we took some of his fascinating stories and a few of my not quite as fascinating but good stories from my past, and we wove those together into the tale and integrated the truth of the Aurora story. So what we did is we made a fictional account on a historical event. So there's this young reporter. Her name's Bonnie Reynolds. Bonnie Reynolds, by the way, was the first victim in Kolchak, the Night Stalker, by the vampire. Okay. That's where I got the name.
Okay.
But anyway, so this 24-year-old Gainesville, Georgia reporter, she's doing this column. She does this column every week called A Century in the News. So she's looking for little tidbits from 100 years ago to report nowadays that's interesting facts. Well, she runs across this story, and we use the original story from the newspapers.
Okay.
She stumbles across the original story and knows that her editor is going to go, get real excited over this. So she barges into his office, takes it in there to him, and he starts a campaign to try to find him. Okay. So she sends him over to Aurora, which is like 20, 30, 50 miles away. And she goes over, and of course she starts stirring up all this trouble because it's a little different in reality because he's buried in the local cemetery, but in the book it's been like a town secret ever since then, trying to keep his grave a secret from nosy feds that want to go in there and dig him up and take him away.
Okay.
So, of course, she starts all this trouble, and the local game warden gets involved, the sheriff gets involved, this pair of cousins that their great-great-grandfather actually stole a small piece of the craft the day it crashed in 1897. They get involved, and it's just it's an entertaining story.
Wow, that would be, I mean, can you imagine being back then and seeing this actually occur? And this is this is what you brought with you as one of your one of the items here is a replica of the UFO actually crashing into the windmill.
And a replica of the wooden cross that they would have used when they buried him, because usually when a stranger wandered into town and died, they'd write unknown. And on his, they wrote traveler.
Oh.
Which is where the title of the book comes in.
All right. Well, that makes perfect sense. All right. That's where you get the title.
And then Shorty here in the corner, he is our full-size replica of the alien as he would have been burned, put in a homemade coffin, and put on display on the boardwalk. And when we do book signings across the country, he goes everywhere with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like his hat.
More people want their picture took with Shorty than anybody else at these conventions we've been traveling to.
Now, did you say that they actually, I don't know if this was a fictitious part of the book or if this was a claim by the locals back then. Did you say that they put the body out on display? And it was photographed, or what you said, but
it's rumored.
Rumored. Okay.
Jim Mars was a very prominent UFO historian. He died just about a little over a year ago. Well, I was lucky enough to talk to him a couple of times before he passed away. And he was excited because he said anybody that's bringing anything positive to the Aurora incident, he was glad because it was such a sleeper subject.
Yeah.
Roswell gets so much attention, Aurora gets practically none.
Yeah.
So he was thrilled that I was writing a book on Aurora, and he said that we had some discussions about if it was true, and he's the one that brought it up. He said that it was rumored that they put him on the boardwalk and displayed him as they would an outlaw at the time, and someone had contacted him, some old lady, some grandma somewhere. Had her great-grandmother, some woman's grandmother, I forget what he said, claimed to have a photo of him. and he was on the hunt for that. He was trying to track them down to either look at it, take a picture of it, buy it, whatever.
Yeah.
But of course, he died before I heard any more about it, and I don't know any more about it than that.
I think he has a pretty good documentary that viewers can look up on YouTube about that as well.
He does. He made several excellent documentaries on Aurora. He was the foremost researcher on the Aurora incident because he lived there.
Yeah.
He literally lived in the Aurora area, so it was near and dear to him.
Now, have you ever thought about tracking down that person and getting the picture?
No, I haven't even. I've never even been to Aurora.
Yeah.
That's one of the places I really want to go. I want to go to the cemetery in Aurora and see it. But no, I haven't been out there yet. Most of the details I got from Texas and all came from my co-author. So, because he lives in Odessa, Texas, so he was able to put the salt and pepper in there from a Texas standpoint and point of view. So, yeah, one of these days I'll get down there.
Well, how far is where he lives from Aurora?
Aurora is 20 minutes north of Fort Worth. Odessa is probably 6 hours further south. Okay. He's down Odessa Midland area, so in West Texas, sort of in the middle to lower part of the state.
Was there any word on? Okay, we heard about what they did with the alien, the pilot. What about the craft? Was it just broken up into small pieces, or? The
craft reportedly was shattered, but a lot of it remained intact. The reports from the time say that they dumped the remains of the craft down an abandoned well. As the years went on, it poisoned the well, and this unfortunate guy moved in there and drank the water out of the well and had some of the worst case of arthritis you've ever seen. There's all kinds of documents about it, and the well was cleaned out, I think, in the 50s. Now, what they did with the remains of the craft, I don't know. Never have been able to get a bottom line on that. I do know that the UFO hunters went out there 3 or 4 years ago and took the cement cap off the well and went down in there looking for fragments, but I really don't know what they found.
I think in the location that this happened, wasn't it a judge's property that this took place on, or I think it was a judge whose windmill it hit and destroyed, but I think there were pieces of metal that were lodged in trees and in the area surrounding to make it believable that something drastic had happened, some type of explosion or some type of collision had taken place. Right.
Well, when it hit the windmill, it veered into the water tower, and when it slammed into the water tower, it and the tower exploded.
Oh, okay.
And this judge had planted this nice little flower garden right beneath the windmill and water tower because, like you said, it was his property. And it rained down all this debris on top of his flower garden. Actually, the sheriff of the time is looking around and says, the judge is going to be mad as hell about his flower garden when he gets back. My inspiration for the sheriff was Rod Taylor as Jonathan Grail in an old series from 1986 nobody's probably ever heard of called The Outlaws. He portrayed a sheriff and 4 outlaws that had got zapped by lightning and slung from 1899 into 1986, and he inspired me for the sheriff in the 1897 parts. The characters in the novel came from so many different realms of my past. To just weave together.
Well, that's interesting. Now you had, I just got to thinking, you said something about Kochak, and that got me thinking about the reporter back in '73. Wasn't the main reporter, I thought the name was Scully, of all names. I thought one of the main reporters for that story was Scully. And I could be wrong on that, but I thought it was.
Skorzeny was the vampire.
Scores and but I mean the real reporter who was actually investigating this in
Aurora.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But
I don't know who it was.
But that got me thinking when you say Kolchak, because Chris Carter was inspired by that show to do the X-Files.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
That's interesting. Also interesting about all of this is during that time, this takes place in 1897 where this occurred, there were so many reports of UFO activity across, not only in Texas, but I think across the U.S.
Yeah, in the novel, I did a lot of research, 2 years worth of research. And I found accounts, really good accounts, going back all the way to the Civil War. And a lot of those are listed throughout the novel. I put little segments of them in there. Reports that craft hit the ground with such heat and force it turned the ground to glass. And when they went out to look at what had crashed, it had markings resembling Egyptian hieroglyphics carved into the craft. The same kind of reports you were getting in the 1970s, you were getting in the 1870s.
Yeah. That reminds me of the Kecksburg UFO crash. They said that they look like hieroglyphics as well. The object had writing or scribing on the outside. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that this actually happened?
The Aurora incident?
Yes.
I believe it did. Jim Mars really and truly believed it did.
Yeah.
And I want to believe in my heart that it really happened the way it was reported in the newspapers. There's been so much talk, especially about this particular event, if it was a fake, if it was, the town had suffered a boll weevil infestation, a great fire, an epidemic, all these things, and the railroad had skirted them and went 20 miles in the other direction. So it's rumored that they concocted all of this to try to save the town. But the logical question is, how would a report of a UFO crashing, and they didn't have the word UFO back then, but how would this save a dying town?
Yeah.
It wouldn't have had any effect on it, because the only people that are going to come over to check it out is going to be the ones that hear about it at the time, and then it's over.
Yeah. Well, the part about the infection, there was claim too that they didn't want the bodies exhumed, the body of the pilot exhumed, because I don't know, was it the townsfolk were saying that, well, we're concerned that this might activate the virus again, or cause people to become sick.
The city of Aurora just does not want that grave messed with.
Yeah.
They've come up with all kinds of things. I've heard that scenario. They're afraid if they go to the wrong grave and start digging, they'll dig up somebody's great-great-grandmother.
Yeah.
They just don't want it.
Right.
They don't want it messed with. They don't want it their sacred little cemetery to be ravaged.
Yeah.
So they'd rather just keep it as it is. And for years and years, the city of Aurora, all they wanted was this to go away. They didn't want any publicity on it. But now they're exploiting it a little bit. They have a little festival there every year. And even on their website, there's this little out-of-control craft doing loop-de-loops in the air. So they're taking advantage of it a little bit now.
Yeah. Well, that stands to reason. It's probably smart on their, I know the Kecksburg's a small town. I know Aurora is a very small town, but probably even smaller than Kecksburg, but they have a huge festival every year, and it brings in thousands of people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's huge. It's a huge event. And, I guess if you can capitalize on something like that, get some tourists in and, learn a little bit of the history of your town, why not? Now, Kerry, what brings you up to Pennsylvania? What are you doing right now?
Well, we do a little television show out of Beaver Falls called Wheels of the Past. We highlight antique cars from around the country that have great stories to tell. I'm the writer and the host of the show. I moved up here from Georgia a year and a half ago to spearhead the project, and so far we've done about 5 episodes. We've done an episode with Butch Patrick, Eddie Munster, on the Munster coach in Dragula. We did an episode at the Corvette Museum where the floor fell in. We did an episode with the one original remaining car used in Stephen King's Christine. We did an episode over in Evans City Cemetery where they filmed Night of the Living Dead using a '67 Pontiac Le Mans that was the same exact color as the one used in the movie. We did an episode on stainless steel cars. So we're just getting off the ground with this. I've been working real hard on this for a year and a half. So that's what brought me to Pennsylvania, because Pennsylvania is the antique car keystone of the country. Since I was 25 years old, I've been going to the big car shows in Hershey and Carlisle because they're the most prominent antique car shows in the country.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. That's pretty interesting. So, well, we are about out of time here. Time goes quick here when we're talking about stuff of this interest. But I wanted to show your book again, Kerry. The book is Traveler, and it is a fictitious story about the Aurora UFO crash. Not that the crash was fictitious, but we go on the journey through a reporter. What and the reporter's name again was
Bonnie Reynolds.
Bonnie Reynolds, that's it. Okay. Well, Kerry, thank you very much again. And,
my pleasure.
And before I go, how can folks look up your book?
It's on Amazon under Traveler and my name, Kerry Trent Haggard.
Okay.
And it's readily available on Amazon, published by Flying Disc Press out of England. And I hope everybody that reads it enjoys it.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much for being on the show. And thank you for joining us for another episode of Chiller Chat. We'll see you next week. Have a good night. Have a good chiller night.
How many times do I have to tell you, just because something isn't good doesn't mean it's bad?